months ago, I inherited a parrot from my grandmother. At first, it seemed like a beautiful bird. Bright feathers, intelligent eyes, perfect speech. But the first night it stayed in my house, it said something that changed everything. It spoke in my grandmother's voice. The problem is, my grandmother had already been dead for 3 days. And that was only the beginning. Because the bird didn't just repeat words. It repeated secrets. Terrible secrets. Secrets that people had buried for years. And the worst part, it started speaking to someone else in the room. Someone we couldn't see. Before we begin tonight's story, if you enjoy truly disturbing horror stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to Fractured Mind Horror TV. And if this story sends chills down your spine, share it with someone who loves dark and mysterious tales. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable. Because the story you are about to hear is not just about a bird. It's about the terrible things that listen when we think no one is watching. This is the parrot. My name is Clara, and I wish I had never taken that bird. If I had known what it would bring into my house, into my family, I would have left it in that empty place where my grandmother died. But at the time, it seemed harmless. Just a parrot. A beautiful one. Bright red feathers across its chest, deep green wings, and a golden streak above its beak that caught the light when it moved. Everyone said it was rare. Your grandmother loved that bird more than anything, the lawyer told me. The cage sat beside the reading chair in her living room. When I arrived to clear the house, the parrot watched me the entire time, perfectly still, not blinking. I remember the first thing it said, in my grandmother's exact voice. "Clara, you finally came." I froze. My grandmother had been dead for 3 days. She lived far from the city, a quiet place surrounded by tall trees and old dirt roads. The kind of place where nights feel darker than normal, where silence feels heavy. My husband Mark and my 2 children stayed in the car while I went inside to pack things. The bird watched every move I made, every step, every breath. Its eyes were black and glossy like polished stone. After about 20 minutes, it tilted its head slowly. Then it whispered again. "Don't open the door." The voice was my grandmother's. Perfect. Not imitation. Perfect. I looked around the house. "Hello," I called. Silence. Just the creaking of the old wooden floor. Then the bird leaned closer to the bars of its cage and whispered something that made my stomach twist. "He's still here." We decided to take the parrot with us. My daughter Emily loved birds. My son Daniel thought it was cool that it could talk. And honestly, it felt wrong leaving it alone in that quiet house. So we loaded the cage into the back seat. The entire drive home, the bird didn't make a sound, just watched. Then, halfway down the highway, it laughed. Not a bird sound. A man's laugh. Deep, slow, unpleasant. Mark looked in the mirror. Did it just do that? Before I could answer, the bird whispered softly, "Don't tell him." None of us had spoken. We placed the cage in the living room. Emily named the bird Jasper, but the bird never responded to the name. Instead, it said something strange around midnight. We were all asleep when I heard it. A whisper from the living room. Soft. Careful. "Clara, don't go downstairs." It was my grandmother again. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. Then another voice answered. But it wasn't the bird's voice. It sounded like a man. Low. Angry. "You promised you wouldn't tell." The bird responded quietly. I didn't. I rushed downstairs. Turned on the lights. The bird sat alone in the cage. Silent. Watching me. 2 days later my sister Rachel came to visit. She had never liked my grandmother. They fought often when we were younger. Rachel walked into the living room and looked at the cage. That bird still alive. The parrot tilted its head. Then in Rachel's own voice it said, "I didn't mean to push her." Rachel froze. Her face went pale. "What did it say?" Mark asked. Rachel shook her head quickly. "Nothing. Just bird sounds." But the parrot kept staring at her. Then it whispered slowly, She hit the table when she fell. Rachel grabbed her purse. I need to leave. She left the house shaking. The bird started talking more after that. Mostly at night. Mostly when the house was dark. Sometimes it sounded like my grandmother. Sometimes like strangers. Sometimes like the children. But the worst moments were when it sounded like someone we didn't know. One night I woke up and heard it whispering softly in the living room. Not to us. To someone else. Yes. Pause. I hear you. Pause again. Then the bird spoke in a new voice. One I had never heard before. Cold. Deep. The door is still open. A week later, Emily came to my room crying. The bird was talking to Daniel. What do you mean? It sounded like you. But you weren't there. I walked into Daniel's room. He was sitting upright in bed. Wide awake. What happened? I asked. He looked at the door. Then at me. The bird told me something. What did it say? Daniel swallowed hard. It said Grandma didn't die in her sleep. After that night, the bird started repeating the same phrase. Over and over. At random times. In different voices. Sometimes whispering. Sometimes screaming. The phrase was simple. But it made my skin crawl every time I heard it. 3 knocks then open. At first it meant nothing. Just nonsense. But over time, it began to feel like a warning. Or a rule. Or maybe a memory. Because every time the bird said it, it looked toward the front door. 2 weeks after we brought the bird home. It happened. 3:12 in the morning. I woke up to the sound of knocking. 3 slow knocks. From the front door. I walked into the hallway. The bird whispered from the living room. Don't open it. Another voice answered. From the cage. Not the bird's voice. A man's voice. Right behind it. She already did once. Then the knocking came again. 3 times. Slow. Patient. And the bird screamed in my grandmother's voice. Clara, run. That was the night I started recording everything the parrot said. Because I realized something terrible. The bird wasn't just repeating words. It was repeating memories. Conversations. Arguments. Confessions. Things people said when they thought no one else was listening. And the more it spoke, the more I realized something had happened in my grandmother's house before she died. Something terrible. Something the parrot had heard. And something that might have followed us home. After the knocking at the door that night, none of us slept again. Mark checked outside. No one was there. No footprints. No car. Nothing but the cold wind moving through the trees in our yard. But the parrot would not stop talking. It kept repeating the same sentence over and over in my grandmother's frightened voice. Don't open the door, don't open the door, don't open the door. Finally, around 4 in the morning, it went quiet. Too quiet. Like something had just left the room. The next morning I decided to start recording the parrot. I placed my phone beside the cage and left it running. At first nothing happened. The bird just sat on its perch quietly. Its feathers puffed slightly as it watched the house. Then around noon, it spoke. But not to us. It whispered. Are you still there? Silence followed. But the bird tilted its head like it was listening to someone answer. Then it said something that made my heart drop. Yes, she brought me with her. I checked the room. No one else was there. But the bird nodded slowly, like it understood something being said back. That evening my daughter Emily sat near the cage doing homework. The bird looked down at her and spoke gently. In my grandmother's exact voice. Emily, sweetheart. Emily smiled. That's great. It sounds just like great-grandma. Then the bird continued. Don't go in the basement. Emily frowned. We don't have a basement. The bird leaned closer to the bars. Yes you do. My blood turned cold. Our house did have a basement. But the kids had never been inside it. That night during dinner the parrot suddenly started chanting. Soft at first. Then louder. Plate, plate, plate. Mark looked annoyed. Can we cover the cage or something? Then the bird screamed. Plate. At that exact second, Emily's plate slipped off the table and shattered on the floor. Everyone froze. The bird laughed. That same deep laugh we heard in the car. Mark stood slowly. That's coincidence. But no one really believed it. 2 days later my cousin Luke came to visit. He walked into the living room and looked at the parrot. Wow, that's a nice bird. The parrot stared at him. Silent. Watching. Then it said quietly, "Luke, where did you bury it?" Luke laughed nervously. "What?" The bird repeated it. Word for word. "Where did you bury it?" Luke's face drained of color. "No idea what you mean." Then the bird whispered something that made Luke stumble backward. "Behind the barn." Luke left immediately. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't answer calls afterward. And that night the parrot began repeating a new phrase. "Dirt is soft. Dirt is soft. Dirt is soft." The recordings I made started revealing something disturbing. Late at night, when everyone slept, the bird spoke to someone. But on the recordings, there was a second voice. Very quiet. Very deep. So quiet it almost sounded like breathing. I turned the volume all the way up. The bird whispered, "She knows now." And the other voice replied, "Not enough." The bird answered again, "I told you she would take me." Then the voice said something that made my hands shake when I heard it. "Good." The whispering got worse after that. At exactly the same time every night. 3:12 a.m. The bird would wake up and start speaking softly. Sometimes in my grandmother's voice. Sometimes in Mark's. Sometimes in the children's voices. But once, it spoke in a child's voice that did not belong to anyone in our house. A little boy. Crying. "Please don't lock the door." Then the parrot responded in that deep man's voice again. Too late. I rushed into the living room. The bird stared at me. Then slowly repeated the sentence. Too late. Mark finally had enough. "This thing is messing with our heads," he said. "It's just repeating old recordings or something." I shook my head. Birds don't know people's secrets. Maybe your grandmother taught it. No one knew those things. We argued for nearly an hour. And the entire time the bird watched us quietly. Then it spoke. In Mark's voice. "Stop lying." Mark went silent. He stared at the cage. The bird repeated it again. "Stop lying." The strange countdown phrase started changing. Before it always said, 3 knocks, then open. Now it said something different. 3 knocks, then run. Every time it said it, the bird looked toward the door, like it was waiting for something. Or someone. One night while we watched television the bird suddenly spoke again in my grandmother's voice. But this time the voice sounded different. Weaker. Like she was far away. "Clara." I stood slowly. "What?" The bird continued. I didn't fall. The room went completely silent. Then the bird whispered something that made my heart race. "He pushed me." Mark looked at me. "Who pushed her?" But before I could answer, the bird turned its head toward the hallway and spoke to someone we couldn't see. "He's here again." That same night Daniel woke us up screaming, "There's someone in the hallway." We ran to his room. Nothing there. But the parrot started laughing again. Slow. Uncomfortable. Then it said something quietly. 3 knocks. Right then. We heard them. From the front door. 3 slow knocks. Mark walked toward the door. But before he could reach it, the bird screamed. In a voice we had never heard before. A woman's voice. Terrified. "Don't open it, he kills again." That was the moment we realized something terrible. The bird wasn't just repeating conversations. It was repeating deaths. And somehow, it had heard more than one. My grandmother wasn't the first voice trapped inside that parrot. And judging by the way it kept whispering in the darkness, she might not be the last. But the worst part came later, when the bird started speaking in my voice, even when I wasn't in the room. After the second night of knocking, none of us felt safe in that house anymore. But leaving wasn't as simple as it sounded. The children had school. Mark had work. And the truth was, we didn't even know what we were running from. All we had was a bird. A bird that talked. A bird that knew things it shouldn't know. and a bird that was starting to sound less like a pet, and more like a witness. I spent hours listening to the recordings from my phone, late at night, with headphones, trying to understand what the parrot was really saying. Most of it sounded like nonsense, fragments of arguments, short sentences, half-finished warnings, but one recording stood out. At 3:12 a.m., the bird whispered, "He's coming back." Then that second voice answered again, the one that didn't belong to the bird. Low, cold, close to the microphone. "Good." The bird replied softly, "She knows now." Then the voice said something that made my blood run cold. "Not enough yet." The next afternoon I heard something strange from upstairs. My own voice, calling Mark from the hallway. "Mark, can you come here?" But I was in the kitchen. Mark looked at me. "You just called me." "No, I didn't." We both ran upstairs. The hallway was empty, but from the living room downstairs, the parrot said it again. Perfectly. "Mark, come here." Later that night the bird started speaking again. But this time the voice was different. Older. Angrier. "A man. You should have kept quiet." The bird paused. Then it answered in my grandmother's voice. "I told you not to come back." The man's voice came again. "You forced me." The bird suddenly screamed, and then repeated the sound of something falling. A loud crash, followed by a horrible silence. Mark looked at me slowly. That sounded like someone dying. The next morning I called the lawyer who handled my grandmother's estate. I asked him how she died. "Natural causes," he said. "She was found near the kitchen table." Near the table. The same thing the bird said to my sister. She hit the table when she fell. I asked one more question. "Was anyone else there when she died?" The lawyer hesitated. According to the police report, the front door was open. That evening the parrot began repeating numbers. At first quietly. 7. Then louder. 6. Emily looked confused. "Why is Jasper counting?" I didn't answer, because I had already heard the next number. 5. The bird looked toward the front door again, and whispered softly. 4. A few days later we hosted a small family dinner. Mark thought maybe having people around would make things feel normal again. My sister Rachel came. My cousin Luke returned reluctantly. 2 of Mark's co-workers came as well. For a while, things seemed fine. Everyone laughed, talked, drank wine. The bird stayed quiet in its cage, watching. Then Rachel mentioned my grandmother, and the bird suddenly spoke. In her voice, "You pushed me." The room froze. Rachel went pale again. "Shut that thing up," she whispered. But the parrot kept talking. "You pushed me, Rachel." Rachel stood up quickly. "That bird is broken." Then the parrot said something worse. "You pushed her first." And it turned its head toward Luke. Luke slammed his glass down. "This is stupid," the bird repeated in his voice. Behind the barn, Luke stared at the cage. "You trained it to say that." "No," I whispered. The bird leaned forward, then spoke in a terrified child's voice again. "Please don't bury me." No one in the room moved. Luke ran out of the house. Rachel followed. Neither of them looked back. After the guests left, the house felt heavier, like something invisible had filled the empty spaces. That night at 3:12 a.m. the bird started whispering again. But this time we all heard it. "Are you ready?" Silence followed. Then the bird nodded slowly. "Yes, they're here." Mark grabbed a flashlight. "Who are you talking to?" The bird looked at the hallway, and whispered in the deep man's voice again. "All of them." That same night we heard something above us. Footsteps. Slow. Dragging. From the attic. We didn't even use the attic. No one had been up there in months. But the footsteps continued. Step. Drag. Step. Drag. The parrot started laughing again. Then it said something that made my heart pound. "They're walking now." The next day I searched the internet about parrots. One thing stood out immediately. Parrots can live a very long time. Some live 50 years. Some even longer. That bird might have lived through my grandmother's entire life, which meant it may have heard every argument, every secret, every crime, and if the voices inside it were real memories, then the bird wasn't just repeating words. It was repeating murders. The bird stopped counting numbers after that dinner, but it started repeating something else, over and over, softly, slowly, like a warning. Too many now. Every time it said that phrase, the house felt colder, and the shadows in the corners looked darker. 3 nights later I woke up thirsty. The house was quiet. Too quiet. When I walked into the living room, the bird was not in the cage. The cage door was open, and the parrot sat on the back of the couch, looking at the hallway. But it wasn't alone. A tall shadow stood there. Not fully human. Not fully visible. Just a shape. The parrot whispered softly, "They're ready." Then the shadow turned its head slowly toward me, and the bird spoke again, in my grandmother's voice. "Clara, run." I ran back to the bedroom, locked the door, and didn't sleep for the rest of the night, because I finally understood something terrible. The parrot wasn't just remembering the past. It was calling something from it. And every secret it revealed, every truth it spoke aloud, was bringing that thing closer to our family, closer to our house, closer to the moment when the bird would finally say the last sentence it had been saving, the one it whispered just before sunrise, in a voice that sounded like someone standing right behind me. "Tonight, it takes one of you." After I saw the shadow in the hallway, I stopped thinking of the parrot as an animal. It was something else. Something that had been listening for years. Listening to people's worst moments. Their lies. Their crimes. Their confessions whispered when they thought nobody was there. And now it was repeating them. Not randomly. Not harmlessly. But like it was feeding something. Something that had followed the bird from my grandmother's house. Something that now lived with us. I went back into the living room at sunrise. The bird was back in its cage. The door was closed. Exactly how we left it. Mark looked at me like I hadn't slept. "You look terrible. I saw something last night. You've been stressed." "No," I whispered. "I saw something standing in the hallway." Before he could answer, the parrot spoke. In my voice. "She's telling the truth." Mark slowly turned toward the cage. That afternoon the parrot started saying names. One by one. People who had visited our house. Rachel. Luke. Mark. Emily. Daniel. Then it said something strange. A name none of us recognized. Arthur. The bird looked around the room. Then whispered slowly. "Arthur still waits." I checked the internet later. Arthur was my grandmother's husband. My grandfather. He died 30 years ago. That night the bird spoke in a voice I had never heard before. A week-old man's voice. "Margaret. Why did you let him in?" Margaret was my grandmother's name. The bird answered itself in her voice. I thought he was gone. Then the man's voice whispered something terrible. "You opened the door." The bird screamed suddenly. 3 knocks. And then in the deep man's voice we heard before. "Thank you." Small things started happening. Cabinet doors opening by themselves. Footsteps upstairs when no one was there. The attic door creaking open at night. And sometimes, we heard whispering from the vents. 2 voices talking quietly. One sounded like the bird. The other sounded like something older. Something patient. One evening the bird began repeating a rhyme. Soft. Slow. Like a lullaby. 3 knocks heard. 1 door wide. 1 truth spoken. 1 will die. Emily looked scared. "Mom, what does that mean?" Before I could answer, the bird finished the rhyme. "When the house remembers, no one can hide." Rachel came back 2 days later. She looked exhausted. Like she hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Mark sat beside me. "What about?" Rachel stared at the cage. "That bird." She swallowed. "It knows about Grandma." The parrot leaned forward slowly. Then it whispered in my grandmother's voice. "You pushed me." Rachel started crying. I didn't mean to. The room went silent. Rachel looked at me. She grabbed my arm during the argument. I pushed her away. She fell. Mark whispered softly. So she didn't die naturally. Rachel shook her head. She hit the table. The bird repeated it again. She hit the table. But the parrot wasn't finished. It turned its head slowly, toward the front door. Then it spoke in that deep man's voice again. You forgot the rest. Rachel looked confused. What rest? The bird answered. He came after. Rachel's eyes widened. No. The parrot nodded. Then in my grandmother's voice it whispered the words that changed everything. He finished it. The bird started mimicking footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Walking across the living room. But no one was there. Then the bird spoke again in that man's voice. You should have stayed quiet. Rachel began shaking. I never told anyone. The parrot answered. I know. Then it whispered something horrifying. He watched from the road. Mark stood up suddenly. You mean someone saw the argument? The bird tilted its head and said the words that froze all of us. He knocked. That weekend Mark insisted we invite everyone again. Rachel. Luke. 2 more family members. He thought if we confronted everything together, we could figure out what was happening. But that night became the worst night of our lives. Because the parrot started talking again. And this time, it revealed everything. While everyone sat in the living room, the bird suddenly shouted. Luke buried him. Luke jumped from his seat. That's a lie. The bird continued. Rachel pushed her. Rachel began crying again. Then the bird turned toward Mark and said something that made my heart stop. You lied too. Mark stared at the cage. What? The parrot repeated in his exact voice. I saw someone outside. Mark's face turned pale. Because he had never told us that. The bird leaned forward. Then whispered slowly. You opened the door. Mark's voice cracked. I thought it was a neighbor. The bird continued. He asked about the argument. Luke looked confused. What man? The parrot suddenly screamed. The deep voice filled the room again. The one who never left. Right then we heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy. Slow. Dragging. Just like the ones from the attic. Everyone turned toward the sound. The parrot whispered calmly. He remembers now. The hallway light flickered. And a tall shadow stretched across the floor. Moving closer. The bird began repeating the rhyme again. Louder. Faster. 3 knocks heard. 1 door wide. 1 truth spoken. 1 will die. Rachel screamed. Make it stop. But the bird just kept chanting. Then suddenly it stopped. And whispered softly. Too late. The knocking came from the front door. 3 slow knocks. Everyone froze. The shadow in the hallway moved closer. And the parrot spoke the most terrifying sentence it had ever said. In my grandmother's broken voice. He came back for the rest of us. That was the moment the house truly changed. Because when the door opened, we finally saw who had been answering the parrot all along. And what had been living inside the voices it repeated. But the worst part was not what we saw. It was what the bird said next. Something that made us realize the parrot wasn't just remembering deaths. It was choosing them. And one of us had already been chosen. When the knocking came that night, none of us moved. 3 slow knocks. The exact number the parrot had been repeating for weeks. The house felt frozen. Even the air felt heavy. The bird watched the front door carefully. Then it whispered the same sentence again. 3 knocks heard. 1 door wide. No one wanted to open the door. But the handle started turning by itself. Slowly. Quietly. The door creaked open. Cold air rushed inside. But no one stood there. Just darkness. Mark stepped closer. There's nobody. Before he could finish, the parrot screamed. Behind you. We all turned toward the hallway. The tall shadow we had seen before was standing there again. But this time it was clearer. It looked like a man. Tall. Thin. Bent slightly forward. Its face hidden in darkness. And its head turned slowly toward the cage. Like it was listening to the bird. The parrot lowered its voice. Soft. Respectful. You came back. The shadow didn't move. But the temperature in the room dropped. Our breath became visible in the air. The bird spoke again. They told the truth. The shadow took one step forward. And we heard something terrible. A second voice. Coming from the darkness. The same deep voice we heard in the recordings. Yes. The parrot turned its head toward us. And for the first time, it sounded tired. Almost sad. Birds remember everything. No one spoke. The bird continued slowly. Words stay. Then it looked back at the shadow. Voices stay longer. Rachel whispered, shaking. What does that mean? The bird answered simply. They never left. Suddenly the parrot began speaking rapidly. Different voices. One after another. My grandmother. Luke. Rachel. The crying child. The old man. Even Mark's voice. All repeating different sentences at the same time. Don't open the door. I didn't mean to push her. Please don't bury me. You should have stayed quiet. The room filled with overlapping whispers. Like dozens of people speaking at once. The shadow stepped closer, and the bird whispered quietly. They are ready. The shadow finally lifted its head. For a brief moment we saw its face. But it didn't look human. It looked wrong. Like a face made of many expressions at once. Anger, fear, pain, all moving slowly across its skin. And then the voices inside the parrot grew louder, as if something was pulling them out. The bird started shaking, feathers trembling. Then it screamed. They belong to you. Luke suddenly collapsed. Right there in the living room. His eyes wide. His mouth open. But no sound came out. The parrot repeated the rhyme softly. One truth spoken, one will die. Rachel screamed. But the shadow moved closer. And the bird whispered again. He buried one. The shadow leaned over Luke's body. And then, Luke stopped breathing. The room fell silent. Only the parrot moved. Slowly. It looked directly at me. Then it said something that explained everything. My cage is full. I stared at it. What do you mean? The bird answered in my grandmother's voice. Every voice stays inside. Then the deep voice spoke again. From the shadow. And every truth feeds me. The bird continued softly. Your grandmother knew. Rachel whispered. She knew what? The bird answered. That the house was hungry. Everyone stared. The bird finished the sentence slowly. So she kept the voices here. Then it looked around the room. At the bird. My grandmother had not kept the parrot as a pet. She kept it as a prison. Every terrible secret. Every confession. Every crime spoken near the bird. Stayed inside it. And whatever that shadow was. It needed those voices. Needed those truths. To grow stronger. And when my grandmother died. The prison came with us. The parrot looked at me one final time. Then it whispered something quietly. Break the cage. I stepped forward slowly. Mark grabbed my arm. What are you doing? The bird said. The shadow moved quickly. Closer. Hungrier. The parrot screamed. Now. I grabbed the cage. Lifted it. And slammed it against the floor. The metal snapped open. The bird flew free. Straight toward the open door. The shadow lunged after it. And both disappeared into the night. The house became quiet again. Too quiet. Luke was gone. Rachel left without saying a word. Mark and the kids barely spoke. And the parrot never came back. Sometimes late at night, I still hear whispering. Very faint. From outside the house. In the trees. Different voices. Repeating old sentences. Old secrets. And sometimes, when the wind is very still, I hear the parrot again. Far away. Saying the same rhyme it once whispered in our living room. 3 knocks heard. 1 door wide. 1 truth spoken. 1 will die. And I realized something terrible. The bird's cage is gone now. Which means the voices it carried are free. And if you ever hear a parrot speaking in the dark, repeating secrets no one should know, Don't answer it, because the bird might only be listening for the next voice to keep forever. So remember, if you ever hear a parrot whispering in the dark, repeating words that no one should know, do not answer it, because some birds don't just mimic voices, they keep them. And if you listen carefully tonight, you might hear one calling your name. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Fractured Mind Horror TV for more spine-chilling horror every 2 days. And until next time, sleep carefully.